If I could request that only audio is used for this, I would like to take this opportunity to cast that vote.
Are you recording now?
Yeah, does it show recording on your end?
It does, yeah. I mean, I'm down with the only audio thing, but then people can't see my Watt from Pedro look that I got going on today. No one would have any idea what I'm talking about, but I'm looking like Watt from Pedro.
Or your choice to always use vertical orientation for Zooms.
Yes, I'm always the only one that only uses a vertical orientation. It's my style, man.
It's your style.
It fits my vertical orientation in real life. So, how's quarantine treating you all?
I'm having a slower week this week for sure. This week, I think also because the weather is really bad here. It's snowy again and it's gray. I feel just a little bit less motivated this week than I have in previous weeks, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that there's a spectrum of somewhere between the two poles of like guarded optimism and suicidal despair. Just sort of ping-ponging back and forth between them.
Yeah.
So I was gonna say, yeah, and it's there's a lot of bread being baked.
Yes.
I have a theory on that.
What's the theory?
My theory is that and I don't know how to quite put this because it's like sort of obviously sort of joking around on it, but like obviously not everyone is baking bread, right? Like nurses and people of color dominantly. It's very much a white person thing. It seems to be, but like the internet seems to be exploding with the baking of the bread, and I think it's because two things: bread, the aroma of bread being baked triggers the same kind of brain lobe as memory that music does. So like it makes you remember times of, calm and to the smell. And then I think the baking of the bread has a very structured beginning and end to it. And we're living in this time now where there appears to be no end to this despair. So those two things together, and people are like, let's bake bread constantly. I think what will happen next, if I am to be predictive, is pizza. People will go, you know what else you can do with dough? Melt cheese and put tomato sauce on it.
I'm already there.
You see what I'm saying? Right?
Flatbreads once a week. Yep.
And what is the distinction between flatbread and pizza?
What it says on the packaging when you buy the dough, I think.
Oh, you're buying the dough. You gotta make the dough.
I'm not making the dough either.
No.
Bad.
It's like if the prep time is longer than the time it takes to eat, that's already just a very short amount of patience for cooking.
I don't think
people love repetition. People love the process.
You don't.
Not for cooking.
I don't think you've yet fully gotten to the various stages of quarantine, right? And eventually you will reach the stage of quarantine where it's all about the preparation. The eating is very secondary to it.
Yeah, and maybe I've got a unique quarantine because it's probably similar to you. It's work more than ever, right? It's like every week is that one hell week that you think about that happens every few months. Now it's every single week,
every day,
yeah. And now it's family obligations on top of that because I'm staying with my parents, and there's no turning off. So cooking is a turned on because you're in the kitchen surrounded by family. It's not a quiet, meditative. That's where I go for a walk. Yeah.
Right. Carly, you're in a similar situation.
I am, but I have the good fortune of having the house to myself for the day. And so I do a lot of cooking like late afternoon, early evening before they get back, because I actually find it to be a very calming thing. But I had to laugh when you said that the preparation time is more. I spend like 2 hours preparing a meal that I eat in 5 minutes. If I used that method, like I would have to I would never stop eating. I would have to have these crazy elaborate piece. But for me, it's something that I'm doing a lot of. I have not baked any bread, and I have bought pre-made dough for homemade pizzas. So I haven't entered the bread baking part yet, but
I feel like I barely know either of you.
You wanted diversity of opinions, right?
Well, you all are battling the family or whatever. I got 24/7 George, which is a whole lot of George. 24/7. so yeah, it's me and my yeast, keeping me company.
What do you do when you find downtime and you're not cooking? Is there anything you go to that
playing guitar?
Is really playing guitar? Yeah.
I was moments before this, I was trying to figure out Aurora Borealis by the Meat Puppets from the seminal album Meat Puppets 2. And I'm reading an oral history of the Meat Puppets, which I'm finding amazingly great. It's really horribly written, and there was no editing involved. Dude just completely like, I'll get anyone who has ever known anything about the Meat Puppets to talk and transcribe it word for word with no editing. I'm like, yeah, I can read this forever.
You gotta be a hardcore Meat Puppet fan. Really.
I am. I am. It does make me think that I'd like to talk about our articles that we've all written, but I'm very hung up being the egotistical person that I am on this whole job to be done thing that music, the role that music must play now as it changes, and the Meat Puppets are playing a very good. They're doing a job that needs to be done for me these days, and I think the recalibration of what the role of music, or Carly, you wrote about soundscapes, all those things that play a role in our lives today, it's a recontextualization for sure.
Well, why don't you talk about that Forbes piece, because I think that sets up both mine and Carly's pieces.
Yeah. So first, it was just good to write again. It's just, that's the other thing. I'm convinced that there's such an innate need for people to create, right? Like the observation that I see, and I think this goes back to the bread thing too. Like people when they're not constantly scheduled, fill that void. I don't know anybody who's just like, yeah, I'm just going to sit and watch Netflix all the time. Like even my students who have their voids are pretty full with schoolwork and everything else. Like one was like, yeah, I'm learning a language, or it's just like it's what we do. I think that's what humans do. So yeah, the writing thing is really helpful to me. But the piece is just about how there's a business discipline called jobs to be done that was kind of pioneered by Clay Christensen, who also pioneered the Innovator's Dilemma, and he asks businesses or whatever to recontextualize their thought process around the things that they put into the world, not so much as, oh, this might appeal to this or that particular person or demographic or whatever, but rather to think of it as, well, people hire products to serve a certain job, to get that job done. Yeah, obviously it makes sense. You hire a shovel to dig a hole or whatever, but when you go a little deeper than that, and particularly when you think about music, we hire music for a specific job, and in a pre-COVID-19 landscape, a lot of people hired music to listen to in their commutes and listen to in their cubicles, and those things are gone. And it's why the streaming numbers have gone down. So the piece is really noticing that, and then asking people to rethink about what their relationship is to music, and how they what job it's serving in their life right now. I think it's really different. I think it's people are approaching music very differently now than they were 2 weeks ago. And it begs the question, what do musicians do? That's the whole thrust of all this is I'm really fixated on how, I've always been fixated on how do you monetize a career as a musician, which has never been easy, but now it's like, oh, let's take away 80% of your revenue. Like you can't tour. So we've done well better think of some other jobs to be done.
So when you talk about the Meat Puppets serving some job to be done with you, what is that, and what is it that you're feeling?
Oh man, that's a good one. It's just happiness. Like I love their music so much, and for me, it's I was a fan of the Meat Puppets. They're like my favorite band in the world when I was 16, 17 years old. Didn't really understand much of it at all. And then I only became a Dead fan like 5-10 years ago or something, and now I listen to the Meatloaf. It's like, oh, they're just doing the Dead, So like this real continuum. They're doing it way more kind of different than Dead, but the through line is there. It's just the tempos, the psychedelic elements of it, all of it just works so well, and it's really really cool guitar playing. Like he's just a badass guitar player. It's not like the speediest or trickiest in the world, but it's just really unique, and I just love playing along.
Cool. Are they doing? I don't know anything about the Meat Puppets, right? I gotta look them up after this.
Love that this whole talk is about the Meat Puppets. But I don't know what they're doing. I mean, they've been around for 30 some years. Like last I saw, they're still touring. They put out a new record recently. Like, they do what they do. I mean, it's inspiring to me. I mean, they had their moment when Nirvana covered a couple of their songs on the MTV Unplugged and brought them up on stage. Has one of my favorite moments of any musical, like, show or whatever. Kurt's up there and he's about to play one of their songs and to tune one of Kurt's guitars off stage. And it's taken to him, and Kurt kind of looks up and goes, "Are you tuning a harp? Why is it taking so long?" and the Meat Puppets were completely out of place there. But then they kind of had a hit after that. But then they went right back to the obscurity that they kind of existed in. But they pioneered the whole. They and like Black Flag pioneered that first wave of SST bands that to this day like kind of set the tone and set the way in which bands tour and that kind of DIY ethos. It was them and the what we call Black Flag and D Boon and Pedro Mike Watt from Minutemen, my lord. They were the ones that really kind of blazed the trail, and it's really durable. I don't know. I mean, I guess like the closest analogy now would be like jam bands in the way that they kind of like just go out, play wherever, tour en masse. But again, no one's touring until like 2022.
Are they doing anything right now in this quarantine era that is representative of like the DIY ethos? What are they doing now are they kind of old?
I think everybody's grasping for the same thing. I think nobody has this figured out. And as I said in one of my pieces, it's like I don't see the answers coming from any kind of incumbent, whether that's a label or bands that have been around for a while. They're largely unaffected by this, or they're everyone's affected, but they'll go on. It'll be some, my piece I talked about, it'll be some young artist who's also tech savvy, who has nothing left to lose. And that's always where the innovation comes from.
I do think that what you said, and I don't know if it was in the piece or in conversations after that, one of the saddest things is that a lot of people who entered this time as artists won't emerge as artists. And I have a good friend of mine in Berlin. She tours with bands. That's her whole job. And she tours with, some bands that do like stadium shows of 100,000 people. And then she's at, smaller punk rock venues. And the conversations that she's having right now, no one's even discussing tour dates before the fall of 2021. And that's a really long time for a touring musician to think of having to supplement their income. Like, she has to totally rethink her work. And I think my friends who are musicians right now, some are baking bread. A lot of them are just with their families too and just enjoying this time. I don't know, like this whole idea of now is the time to learn a new language or write your first novel. I don't think that's always the right approach. Like, certain people approach this in different ways. And I know in my piece too, it's like, I think this is a time where you don't actually have to have a huge creative output. You don't have to do anything that you look back on and feel like it was something life-changing, that you've created your life's work in this time. I think if you spend this whole time just reflecting or, growing or just challenging yourself, then that can be as valuable as, learning Japanese or writing your first movie script. So I think people are handling it differently, and it is really too bad that a lot of artists just won't be able to continue that output. But I think Dan also gave some pretty interesting ideas of ways to keep that up. And I think, I mean, I am seeing more and more people artists trying to engage differently or in different ways to them, things that they weren't doing before that they are doing now. I just don't know. I feel like the urge to create is a very human urge, but I actually think there's a huge amount of new stuff being created all of the time. So it's also about how you kind of work through that, how you find the content that you're looking for, because I feel like there's actually more content than ever. Like you guys are saying, you're busier than ever. So I don't know. There's an interesting dichotomy happening right now.
That's a good point, though. Talk about your piece, because through your piece, I discovered content that had been up in the world forever that is making me feel a lot more comfortable right now. So,
well, in February, I went to this conference called Sonic Acts in Amsterdam. And it's a really cool conference. It's kind of more like artist based, but they do have some panels, and then they have art installations, and they kind of use the arts to address some of the bigger topics. And this year was climate change. And so I went to it. I'd been, I don't know, in 2017, maybe I'd been before. And it always kind of resonated with me. And there was this one researcher, this one woman, who I actually mentioned, Anya Kengeiser. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correctly. And her whole work is around kind of sound ecology. And the project that she was talking about anyways, was on an island off the coast of Australia. And her whole research and work there, she just will like sit in a place and do sound recordings for months or however long. And in those stories, she talks a lot about colonialism in addition to the effects of just climate change. And she was playing these recordings of these places. And for me, hearing her talk, I started thinking how it is true our environments can tell us so much more about the state of the world that we're living in. And at the beginning of the quarantine too, people were talking about how the birds were singing louder, or you were seeing, how like the environment seemed to, I don't want to say heal, because that's become also like a meme in of itself, but our environment started sounding and looking a little bit differently. And so the idea of sound ecology, I thought, was something just really interesting. And I thought also already about the sounds that we hear in hospitals. And so it was this idea of, okay, what do sounds mean? How do they affect us? And maybe, to my point before, if you use this time reflect or think a little bit differently, I think that can be as valuable as trying to have some really impressive output. And I'm also at my dad's house out now. This is not my normal environment. It sounds very different. Rural Ontario to my apartment in Berlin, Germany. It's a very different kind of soundscape out here. But I think, we take sound for granted, or like George said, music for hire. We have our kind of routines, and that involves sound, whether it's the sounds around us or the sounds that we choose, be it through music or podcasts or streaming, whatever kind of digital content we're using. And so for me, I'd been thinking a lot about that and hearing that recent talk. And so thinking about sounds and how they can affect our happiness and our health. There are a lot of things. There are some silver linings here, like the sounds of our cities. Maybe it's nice to have a break from that. But there's also really interesting areas like the sonification of data in hospitals, for example. I think for me, it was a piece about kind of pausing right now, but still trying to kind of introduce interesting people or companies that explore sound in a way that goes beyond just audio or, like the regular audio forms that we're used to. So that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah, I mean, so much there, and it definitely it inspired me when I was thinking about the job to be done for music in hospitals. Like, I mean, it just devastates me to hear these people are dying, you know, alone, and one of the first things people are asking for is you know, some kind of music, something like that. So it's but yeah, we don't think about that. I'm loving not hearing airplanes constantly overhead. You know, I'm loving not being on an airplane, but it's when I hear an airplane now, it's like, wow, what's that strange sound? And to your prior point about like the kind of like doing things in this quote unquote space. Again, as I said about the bread thing, that's a super privileged kind of thing, and I'm deeply aware of it. And same deal with like, I mean, you know, Shakespeare wrote or whatever, whoever wrote whatever and whatever
Mhm.
past quarantine. It's like, yeah, but he wasn't or she wasn't raising kids at the same time and trying to work. Like, I mean, so many people with whom I work, they're on Zoom calls and also trying to be a primary caregiver and also try. It's an impossibility. So, yeah, I mean, I'm making light of it. I do think there is still an impulse to create, but that's a luxury that some people have, and a lot of people just don't at all. So I'm deeply sensitive to the idea that it's really glib to just say, yeah, well, use this time to learn Latin or something. No, I'm going to use this time to try to not go completely insane and keep the wheels on the bus of my household.
Yeah. But I think it's also kind of, I mean, when we think of music, we think of what we just know as music, but there's music kind of all around us. Our environments create music, and this idea of kind of personal soundtracks. And there is still a lot of beauty. There's beauty in the different sounds, there's beauty in the silence. And again, just to bring up the hospital thing, I mean, the hospital thing is interesting in so many ways because it is just a kind of cacophony of overwhelming beeps and buzzes to the average person. But the people who work in hospitals, it's just like they hear a song. They hear the language that they speak. And so this idea of the sonification of data, the company that I reference in the piece, Man-Made Music, that's kind of what they're doing. They're trying to work with hospitals and healthcare professionals to make the sounds emitted more pleasant also for the person in the room. Because if you're the person in the room and one of the machines you're hooked up to starts going off, your initial reaction is one of panic, but it could be saying something positive, something the doctor needs to know, but it could be positive. And so I think kind of imbuing music into different parts of our life, or realizing that there are really musical parts of life and working to make it maybe sound a little bit different, is also a really cool area to explore as an individual, as a musician, as someone who's interested in musicology, or just someone who's worried, not worried, someone that has to maybe spend time in hospitals right now, or is worried about spending time in hospitals.
So that's interesting. Are you embracing your new soundscape that you've found yourself in, or are you manipulating it to make yourself feel more comfortable?
I am embracing it for the most part because, as I mentioned, it sounds very different out here than it sounds in Berlin. And I know that it would sound different if I was at my apartment in Berlin as well. It would sound very different right now. But the way that it sounds often in my neighborhood in Berlin, it's a nice kind of break to have none of those sounds. And I think for me, the silence has been loud because I'm not used to it. When there's a lot of noise in the background, it just becomes kind of like a white noise hum, but the silence can be quite deafening. But for me, I've actually been embracing it.
Yeah, I don't know if I like have developed tinnitus or however you say it, like ringing in the ears thing, or maybe it's just quiet and like it's just a constant thing that I hadn't been noticing. But yeah, that's been, and then I thought it was, you know, the COVID that had gotten me, and it was just like this perpetual ringing. And but yeah, the silence is interesting because I love me some ambient noise. Like I like having just racket kind of going on. You know, it soothes the savage breast or whatever. And like, so I'll have, you know, MSNBC or something on, which is its own particular breed of hellscape at times. But at least, you know, as I say, I'm just by myself, so at least it's kind of noise. And then I turn it off, and the just ringing, just that ambient kind of buzz of life or whatever is an interesting sound. But Dan, you're you know, I mean, you like we wrote articles and you wrote a book. So you know, and that's really prescriptive in like how artists need to be thinking about navigating this. And I mean, you had started that before all this went down, right? Like
No, I had conversations specifically with Peter, one of our clients, about how there are all these tools that are available to artists that they're just not using, live streaming being one of them. Whereas people in other creative fields have embraced them, whether that's live streaming or even just YouTube, which I think is such a basic, it's such an understood media platform. Everyone
understood
uses
or
it.
misunderstood.
Everyone knows how to use it.
Kind of.
So
Like I always say this to my students. I'm always like, you all think that you're like savvy on the internet, but like they couldn't run a campaign or understand like a funnel to save their lives. They're sort of digital natives, you know.
I mean, from a consumer point of view,
Yeah, for
everyone,
sure. Yeah.
everyone knows how to use consumer, or everyone knows how to use YouTube for their consumption, right?
Yeah.
And YouTube consumption has gone through the roof right now. CPMs have gone down, so creators are getting paid less per 1,000 views, but they're getting so many more views that it's kind of balancing out. People are spending less money on YouTube.
Right.
But it's think about how musicians use YouTube. They put out a music video once every 2 months, 3 months, whatever, which is the YouTube playbook is consistency, right? And putting things out that generate kind of a recurring audience base that comes back, watches your videos over and over again. And that's how this whole industry of YouTubers came up. And artists have just failed at it because it's not a traditional distribution platform for them. So it blows my mind that it makes sense that photographers are able to use YouTube really well, but makeup artists and people that are just living their daily life, but they have a camera, so they call it a vlog, and they're able to get hundreds of thousands of views, which turns into $10,000 a month. And why aren't artists doing that? It's such a meaningful revenue stream.
You're right, and it's something that's infuriated me forever because like artists are the worst self-promoters so much of the time, and you're dead right. You look at somebody who's like, yeah, I know how to put on makeup, right, or whatever, and they make some videos, and the next thing you know, like they're an influencer, and and musicians just can't or won't or whatever do it. And I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't call YouTube out in terms of their absolutely just offensive rates that they pay in terms of the stream. I mean, by far and away, the biggest consumption platform for music isn't Spotify, isn't Tidal, or any of those others. It's YouTube. And they pay the musicians, the songwriters, and the performers the absolute least, and it's reprehensible. I mean, it's inexcusable, and yet once again, the artist community just we're just going to kind of roll with it. So I love the fact that you're trying to monetize it, or at least teach people to monetize it. But one of the core fundamental problems is like we have to decide as a society: do we want to have artists be paid more, or I mean, the federal. Our legislators vote on what is known as the statutory mechanical royalty. So our representatives vote on it. That is the amount of money that a songwriter is paid when their music is reproduced and distributed. That rate, which is set by Congress, has been set since 2003 at the same rate. In 17 years, that rate has not gone up. The cost of life because of inflation has gone up probably half an order of magnitude or something, and for musicians, nothing, and like nobody talks about it, and YouTube's the worst offender.
Is that a barrier, do you think, that artists aren't utilizing something like YouTube more?
They're utilizing it, they're just not monetizing it, right? I mean, that's your whole thesis, Dan, right? They're not using
it correctly. Yeah, right. They're putting up one video that they hope people rewatch over and over again, rather than a series of videos that generates a high volume of plays over time. But that's interesting. I mean, I wonder, because artists aren't using YouTube in the way I'm suggesting, if they decided to, and that became a more important revenue stream, would then the music industry then try to lobby for that? It's what happened with TikTok, right?
Well, kind of. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, with TikTok, once it became a meaningful platform for the music industry, then now they're saying, all right, we want to get paid more fairly. If YouTube was more than just a put your music video up, if it was actually a a distribution platform with more regular content from artists, meaning more revenue, and it'll be a lot more apparent how little YouTube is paying. Would then the music industry lean into YouTube and put more pressure onto them?
I mean, my point of view on it is that the three major labels are making such gargantuan windfall profits, $1 million an hour from the DSPs, that, the TikTok story is an interesting one where at first, I mean, it is by all legal standards, the way that people are using TikTok is prima facie infringement. You are immediately infringing, creating derivative works, and neither the publishers or the labels could sue because TikTok at the time, Musical.ly or whatever it was in China. And like you can't find them to sue them. So it goes and it grows. And then what happens is, I mean, I see my 13-year-old son do this. He will discover something on TikTok. It's basically the only place he discovers something. Then he digs it, and then he goes to YouTube. To Spotify to stream it. So it just becomes this funnel, and then a stream on Spotify represents significant revenue to the labels. So the labels are happy as little clams about people discovering things on TikTok or YouTube or whatever, because they monetize it on Spotify. What I believe has happened is now TikTok's kind of had to come to the table and say, okay, well, we want some of this. They went to the labels to get a rate. The labels said no. But they're not. It's the same thing with Spotify. They're not going to shut them down. It's just they win either way, who loses is the individual independent artist. And I think what's so important about your book is that it is showing the independent artists that they can and should be monetizing these things. I mean, if you are an artist who owns your own master recording, writes your own songs, doesn't have a label, puts it up onto Spotify, and then uses TikTok, YouTube, everything else in the same way that labels do to funnel and generate streams, you can over time start to make some kind of material money off of Spotify. But if you fractionalized it out across a billion different parties, you'll never make any.
And a big part of the book is that average revenue per fan, right? And thinking about ARP, it's rolls off the tongue. So if, and I talked about this a few times in your classes, George, when I used to work at Pledge Music and people were still buying downloads, you could count on your fans spending $10 per release. Yeah. And that was meaningful forever. Now they go to stream it, right? And that's your average revenue per fan went off a cliff unless you're touring, which you can't anymore, right? And so now what do you do? And if you put a strategy behind it and think of it as average revenue per fan, which is, I don't think how many artists actually think, then you think, all right, if my fans want to spend more money on me, is there a way for them to do that beyond just buying a t-shirt or a general member t-shirt? And so that's where the idea of subscription revenue and places like Patreon and Gumroad become so important, because for fans that do want to spend money, and they're definitely out there, you're giving them an opportunity to, and there's a value exchange. But if you choose not to do that, you're potentially leaving money on the table at a time when no one can afford to.
Totally right. I mean, the kind of 1,000 true fans meme's been around for a long time, right? Where I forget who first popularized it, but like, dude was like, look, if you can get 1,000 people to pay you, $8 a month on whatever, whether that's, the t-shirt, ticket, whatever, that adds up to roughly $100,000 a year. The problem with that is, and this is, people don't understand, in order to get 1,000 people who are purchasing you, I'd say you need to put 100,000 or more into the top of the funnel awareness to by the time you lose those people. And that's where people get lost, is that they think, I just need to get 1,000 people who pay me $8 a month. Sure. But to get those 1,000 to pay that 8, you probably need 100,000 or more who are aware of you and think about paying. And it's true of all the arts, right? I mean, it's not just music.
Yeah, you've got to have basically a campaign. I put the music marketing funnel in the book, and you have to think about each stage of that: the awareness level stage, passive consumer, passive fans, active fans, what I call them. To convert people from each stage to the other. And if you can do that without spending money, that's amazing. And that probably means you have incredible art and incredible ability to put out interesting content. Most people don't. So there is going to be advertising costs and things like that. But
I think
at
people
least you can
focus. Go ahead.
so at least looking at it that way, you can come up with some kind of plan and you can visualize how the top of funnel awareness can lead to that type of person that would actually make a purchase. Because it's not a people discover you and they immediately decide to spend $8 a month. It's they go through phases, and if you can control that journey, you're much more likely to see success.
Couldn't agree more. I just think I think artists and I think, so often music's a canary in the coal mine. Sadly, after this, we're going to see a lot of other industries having to be more like this quote unquote gig economy, which of course is a sort of artifact from the music business anyway. But I wish people would focus less on like refining and polishing in some lapidarian way their art, and instead focus more on finding an audience for it, right? Like it makes me nuts. It's the whole purpose, not product thing, but it's like, and it's going to be true of chefs and cooks and visual artists and everything. You don't know. And if you sit there and think, well, I'm going to try to make music or food or visual art or photography for the masses, yeah, best of luck with that. Like I always say to people, just find 10, 20, 30 people who feel better about themselves when they hear your work, your art, eat your food or whatever. They will tell their friends and spend more time identifying those people and less time, becoming, making Dark Side of the fucking Moon.
Yeah, and it's always opportunity cost, right? I mean, if you have a limited amount of hours in the day and you're spending all of it perfecting that solo
all the time. You don't know what you think. You have a thesis, you have a guess. Get it out there and test it now more than ever, right? In this time of absolute utter disruption, no one's going to give you a hard time if you try something in good faith. And I think tone is important and being sensitive is important, but going and trying things now, there's never been a better time. You have a world that's ready to try. I would say don't do it in a skeuomorphic way.
Well, sure. So you have a student that's a musician and they say, all right, I've been wanting to put music out, but I haven't because I've been perfecting it. I want to test it. What does that look like?
But it's not just a student. I mean, we have clients that it's I've got a I'm not going to name specific clients or business. I've got X number of business and I've got an idea for this product. Let's woodshed it into the ground and think about everything that might not work and all this. It's like, no, let's try something,
Mm-hmm. I think it's right now, especially though, it's difficult to start from nothing because you can't go out and play a show or an open mic, right? Whereas if you have an audience, you can test. If you don't have an audience, the venues for testing are, unless you're spending money, are a little bit more restricted,
I suppose. Or there's some new way that will begin to emerge. Art, music, just like love and life, find a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's, as we talked about this conversation, there's now a different type of need and a different type of approach for music. And the smart and savvy musician will be making their art that's true to their heart and their soul right now. And they all have friends, right? I mean, even I have like a friend, so share it with that friend, I mean, I don't know, like give without asking for anything in return.
Yeah.
But not skeuomorphically.
Do you want to talk about skeuomorphic?
Obviously, because I just keep saying the word skeuomorphic. What I want to talk about is the fact that I'm apparently the only one that saw the Capitol Theater put out a blog post about like all of the recipes from the people that you play there frequently. So it's like, I don't remember any of them except, but the only one I remember is like, because like the Sheryl Crow's margarita or something. Like, who cares, right? But Bob Dylan, his recipe was for sticky pudding or like toffee pudding or something.
Oh yeah.
And one of the ingredients is shredded suet, SUET, which like, I don't know if that's like an organ or like some cow fat or something, but I can pretty much promise you not many people have shredded suet kicking around the house, Bob. And then his description of his how he likes to enjoy his pudding, toffee. He said, whatever. He's like, well, lots of people like to put syrup on it, but I like to pour custard on top of it.
Yeah.
Who has custard kicking around? And then like who pours custard? Isn't custard something like that's just unfrozen ice cream? You eat it with a spoon. You
No,
don't
no, no,
pour
no,
it.
no, 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 no. No, that's you're thinking of American custard. And English custard, that's it's basically it's a thick, warm, icing would be the wrong word, but it's this thick, warm, not super sweet thing that you pour on cakes.
I don't. Is that Scotch egg? You're talking about Scotch egg? So I'm flaunting my ignorance here, right? Like I've been consumed with baking bread apparently, and the yeast has gone to my head. Okay, so what is it? What's the thing we were just talking about a second ago? The stuff he pours.
Yeah, custard.
Like custard. So that has a different. There's an English custard.
Very different. Yeah. Well, it might just be this American custard, which is wrong, and then there's the rest of the world's custard. I imagine Carly spending so much time in Europe knows what I'm talking about. I hope.
Actually, I assumed it was a thick custard too. I don't know that much about English cuisine, but I will say also in that article, the one that I did think was really funny, Snoop Dogg's 8-layer dip, and it's like 7-layer dip is one of the ingredients, and then I think it's like chicken wings or something. It's just like the whole article is nonsensical. It's like none of these. It's like Elton John's. I think that's not right actually, but Elton John's split pea soup, and I'm like Snoop Dogg's 8-layer dip. And the whole thing is just nonsense. But it's
wait, Snoop's thing, his 8-layer dip. One of the ingredients was 7-layer dip.
Yes, one of the ingredients in his recipe is 8-layer dip. Maybe it's a 9-layer dip. Maybe he adds 1 or 2 things, but it like one of the ingredients is go buy 7-layer dip.
I love that. Oh, that's awesome.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this type of, again, it's this weird, like this is my life, right? Like it's this weird, because I'm in front of the damn thing all the time. So it's this weird bouncing back between like, oh, I gotta go teach for 8 hours or talk to clients and, talk about furloughs or like talk about business opportunities, and then also read about Bob Dylan's toffee pudding. Like there's just no distinction and division. I mean, my brain is just like oozing out of my ear because of this weird, like usually, when I'm not doing this, like there are at least some hours during the day when I'm just in front of a classroom or on a plane or something where I'm not having the stimulus kind of overload of all this weird random information. I like it though. I like filtering into it. It delights me to know, and just the randomness of it all. But yeah, so skeuomorphic thinking. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the big problems is that it, historically people go, okay, so now we have to do things online. Let's replicate an offline experience. Like if you think about the early internet, like there were those jive ass websites that like were Flash based. Remember before Steve Jobs killed Flash, and like you go to a URL and you'd have to like open a door and then walk into the shop, and there'd be like, and it's like, this is the worst experience of all time, right? Like, in real life, I like opening doors and going to shops. Why do I have to do it on the internet? And so I fear that a lot during this time, a lot of artists are gonna be like, well, I can't tour, so just tune in with me on my couch or whatever. And that has its charm to a certain degree, but it lacks, what I'm increasingly kind of thinking of is like that third, Starbucks is the third space, so I don't want to call it that, but like there's a third dimension when you're at a live show. Like, so where if you're at some show, sure, the band's playing, but typically you're standing there with someone else, and there's like that ambient kind of conversation you have with the person, or you kind of nudge them when something cool is happening, or you kind of have a side conversation. And we haven't yet figured out how to do that online. I mean, I think the closest replication of that would be like Twitch, where people are watching video gamers, but as interesting, and to me it's not interesting at all, but to people that like watching video games, as interesting as the video games is the little side scroll of people chattering back and forth. Music hasn't yet figured that out yet. It's like, oh, you just sit there passively and watch me play on my couch. Like, you really, really have to love that band to like that. I mean, it's not interesting to me.
But it starts skeuomorphic. It always starts. It's got to start with skeuomorphic thinking before it can evolve into something that is more.
I wish it didn't. Like, I mean, my whole mantra is like, well, why? Like, I mean, I wrote a piece like years ago for Forbes about like the failure of VR is because everyone's trying to think skeuomorphically. But I ran into this company called the Wave VR, and you're like, yes, we don't do that. We make you feel like you're on LSD on the VR, which is what everybody wants. Like, I don't want to be on stage with, the Rolling Stones playing guitar, like, but I'd be happy to fly, like that type of thing. So I think it's a mindset. I think it's a lazy kind of mindset of innovation. There's a terrible laziness around innovation of just kind of accretion. And I wish more people would view it with more of the sort of naive mind of like, well, why? Why do we have to keep doing it this way? I mean, the school thing, like I wrote a piece about how, where Berkeley was a purpose with a classroom, not a classroom with a purpose, or a purpose with a campus, not a, my whole point is like, okay, so we can't be in class anymore, but we can still have some of those magic moments, but not if we try to replicate it exactly the same way. And there's been zero innovation really in academia about how I go into my classrooms, there's still pencil sharpeners. It's like, well, when was the last time you saw somebody use, let alone sharpen a pencil? There's always one dude, right? It's always like one hippie dude that like in the middle of class, like, oh, I need to go sharpen my pencil. Like, but for the most part, the pencil sharpeners are not doing a lot. And they're all vestiges of a time that's really lost its, we're still doing the Socratic method. Like, maybe it's time to move on. But it requires non-innovators dilemma thinking. It requires you to think afresh. And I hope that this time and place shows people that planning and thinking, okay, I'm going to build on these foundations. Good luck with that. Like, if people don't realize the ephemeral nature of life right now, and that we're all just building castles on sand, they're crazy. So be in the moment, make something cool, find people that dig it. I mean, 3 weeks ago, we were all talking about what show we were going to see, what restaurant we were going to go to. It's like somebody just flipped a switch and the world went upside down. It'll happen again. I'm old.
I wonder part of the reason is so many people haven't caught up to the existing tools that we have. It's such a hurdle to get to whatever is coming next, right? It's
a mindset too. I don't agree with that. I think it's like it's I hate it when like my students and when business people I work with, they dismiss new as novel and like immature or something. Like the amount of people that poo-pooed on TikTok when it first came out, and like, I don't like TikTok. I'm not a 13-year-old girl, but like I'm smart enough to know if like every 13-year-old girl and guy and whatever is using it, maybe I should pay attention to it and not just dismiss it out of hand. Like, that's how you get old. Is like you just stop being open to things. And I refuse to believe that there isn't some new and interesting technology way of doing things that is at our fingertips at any moment. Just like the moment I feel that, like I don't know what the point is. Just bored out of my mind.
Though I think it's as important to recognize which platforms do work for you and which maybe won't serve you. Just because there is something new, it doesn't mean that it should be utilized by every brand or artist or individual.
Super smart. I couldn't agree more. I just don't know. Like, I want to go into it with not a dismissive attribute, but rather one of curiosity and open-mindedness, and go, because you don't know, and so like, why not at least get some kind of fluency with it and test it? And you're dead right. Like, I mean, everyone that put all their brand equity behind MySpace or Snapchat or something is regretting it, and everyone's been caught with their pants down with TikTok.
Well, it's like everyone bought into Facebook ads and poured a bunch of money in there. And then, it's like the actual value of that is determined by Facebook. They tell you how successful your ads were. So I think you're right. If there is something new, you can explore it and test it. But I don't think that every institution or business or individual not utilizing the newest, shiniest thing is necessarily a bad thing.
Totally agree. I mean, we tell our clients all the time, it's like, yeah, no, you do not need X and Y account. Like, but there's also benefit to, like, you can, and I think this is true for artists and everyone else, entrepreneurs, like if you're early on with a platform, you can get disproportionate benefit from it, right? Like, it's really hard now to gain followers on Twitter or something, right? Like it's just that unless you really just sort of pop in some other way, the gradual sort of accumulation of followers just plateaus. Whereas 5-10 years ago when it was starting, just the fact that there were less people on it, you could grab kind of market share that way. So I think you're dead right. I mean, you've got to be discriminated about it, but I just don't. I don't know. My weird kind of optimism is that there is interesting and new every day.
Well, I think one of the things that I really like about your book, Dan, and the advice in there is that, of course, it's super applicable to where we are now. But, as to everything that George is saying too, I mean, yeah, okay, we're in this situation now, but it will change. What the outcome of all of this will be, I don't think anyone has any clarity on that. But a lot of the things that you are kind of really laying out in a clear way can be continued and built upon no matter what the situation is. It doesn't require a quarantine. It doesn't require us to all be locked down. It is a good time, as George said, to just try something new with kind of no ego, no fear of failure. It's just, why not try it? But I do think there's a lot of longevity in a lot of the things that you've suggested. And I think there will be a lot of longevity in just the changes we've made it as a society during this time. I think that there will be very lasting effects from this that are carried over to, I don't know, because a lot of things are being reevaluated. I think it will be interesting to see what sticks. But a lot of these things, a lot of these new ways of working, or we've shown ourselves how effective these new ways of working can be and have always been. It's just a matter of embracing them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I tell my students, it's like, it sucks that we're not in the classroom, but I'm forcing them all to use Slack, and it's like that's gonna help, right? I mean, because you're gonna go out in the workspace, and like, I know with us, like if somebody wants to work with us right now, intern or whatever, and they come to me and they don't know how to use Slack or Trello, I don't have time to teach them. So being a distributed workforce or whatever, like we've had to learn these tools, and so it's very fluid and familiar for us, but a lot of students don't. They get and then they get out there into the workforce and like, I don't know how to use any of this. I do think I want to talk about just like some of the crap that's been like keeping my brain on straight through this, like the books and movies and videos and stuff. But I'm curious about what has for you all. I was asking people this, and I'm frequently disappointed in what I get back. So I'm a lot riding on what you all tell me.
No pressure. So what is the actual question?
Well, it's all just a selfish way for me to be able to like talk about the shit that I love. But I want to hear what you all like too, like music, books, TV, whatever that's keeping you sane through this ish.
I mean, aside from 8-layer dip,
9-layer dip, man.
9-layer dip.
Buy 7-layer dip. Add chicken wings and then some other layer.
Like every time we talk about it, it's going to add another layer.
14-layer dip. Yeah, two 7-layers dip on top of each other.
I got two things that are keeping me really sane right now, neither of which is super interesting. I discovered yerba mate like
right
8 months ago because I don't drink coffee, but I need caffeine.
Right.
And black tea will only get you so far. So that keeps me sick, because better than like a Monster or a Red Bull, which is the alternative. But I've been, to kind of go back to soundscapes, I've been watching on YouTube walking tour videos of my favorite cities, especially because now I'm in rural Pennsylvania and I'm used to my apartment in Brooklyn, which is right off of Main Street, or the office that I rent, which has 300 people in it. I'm used to kind of this vibrant atmosphere, and obviously I miss all my favorite cities. So I have a big TV behind me. There are 4-hour-long 4K 60 FPS walking tours. I can go from Barclay Center in Brooklyn to Madison Square Garden from my couch And sometimes I just put that on in the background, and it's just like there's activity going on, because there is no activity in Regalsville, Pennsylvania.
Regalsville.
So that's what I enjoy. And the new book on Instagram just came out, No Filter, about.
Is it a book about the founding of Instagram and stuff? I don't know.
Yes.
Like what was the one that Nick Bilton wrote about hatching Twitter? That's a great book. Yeah.
I love that so much that you're going on walking tours. I think that's actually just so great.
It's a whole niche on YouTube, and I found ones, the obvious ones like New York, London, Boston, all the cities I've spent a lot of time in. But I found one of my favorite towns in the world is this kind of small town an hour outside of London called Guildford. There's a walking tour of Guildford, England, just going down the main street. There's a small castle there.
Small castle.
Mini castle.
Castle-like.
Castleette, yeah. What about you, Carly?
Well, I mean, as I've already mentioned, I'm doing a lot of cooking. I find that just really soothes me. And I can spend like 5 hours cooking and preparing things, and it never feels like time wasted for whatever reason. It always feels productive. It's like a restorative act for me. And it's not necessarily something that's different, but I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I am just like plowing through all kinds of new podcasts, re-listening to old podcasts. I don't know. It does make me it doesn't make me feel bad because I don't feel guilty about it, but it is kind of strange. I actually am not listening to that much music right now, as to our conversation earlier. I don't know why. I think maybe it's just the lack of interaction, hearing people interact. A lot of the podcasts that I listen to are kind of more like interview style ones. So like NPR's Fresh Air, I really like, or My Favorite Murder, which is also just like two people discussing things. So I find that it's like the podcasts that I'm more drawn to are kind of conversation based. Maybe it's because I am just not having that many right now, but I think those two things. And I don't know, I kind of went through a little bit of I think when everyone was on lockdown, everybody wanted to kind of touch base and communicate. And I got a little bit burnt out from even just the requests of like, let's video chat, let's FaceTime, to then feeling like I need a little bit of connection with people, kind of connecting with friends that I don't see or that are far away, especially ones with kids, to kind of like connect with them has been really nice, and not something that I normally would have time for, plus the 6-hour time difference that I normally find myself in. It's been easier to kind of reconnect with people that I maybe have lost touch with a little bit. But so yeah, I think those few things are kind of keeping me somewhat sane during all of this. What about you, George? Now that we've given disappointing answers, what?
Hey, I must say, there's probably a walking tour of Marblehead somewhere. If not, I'll just film one.
If not, make one. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'll just make one. Let's strap a camera to my new hat. No, so I don't know how to pronounce this band's name. I've looked it up. I've heard it said, and I cannot remember it to save my life. And I blame them because it's gonna be a blockage for them. But it's Khruangbin or something like that. Khraungbin, I believe. Unbelievable. I love everything about them, right? It's largely instrumental. It's got that badass kind of Ethiopian guitar thing going on. I don't know, like, I gotta figure that out. That Saharan African guitar sound just makes me crazy. Stephen Malcolm's new record has that sound on it too. I think it's going to be the new thing. But they do like the woman plays like a dub bass kind of thing, and the dude plays trap drums. It's just unbelievable. I find it to be perfect. And they do playlists on Spotify too, so like they'll just curate their own things that they're interested in. It's unbelievably great. Love that. I've already mentioned the Meat Puppets book that I'm deeply obsessed with. And then my third thing, pour over coffee. That's my new jam. And I'm becoming an expert at pour over coffee. And Dan, I know you don't drink coffee, but I bet you if I made you pour over coffee, you'd be like, maybe I should reconsider this. But there's a whole science to this pour over coffee thing, and I'm deep down the rabbit hole on it. I'm looking at books to buy. I'm watching YouTube videos on it. I'm becoming quite adept at pour over coffee.
Keeps things exciting, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I'm not mad about my yerba mate, but it
Why
sounds
don't
like you care about it a lot.
I
Huh?
do.
Why don't you drink coffee? Have you just never, or you don't like the taste, or it affects you too much?
Yeah, I guess I've never actually drank coffee, but I've had coffee flavored things, and all of them have turned me off. And there's a candy in England called Revels. I don't know if you ever had those.
Is it full of pudding?
Custard.
No, it's not full of pudding or custard. They're all little
Scotch egg.
you and Scotch eggs, man,
I find them
which are
fascinating.
fantastic with a bit of Branson pickle. Yeah,
Oh yes, of course.
but it's this little pouch of, it looks like chocolate malt balls, but each ball is slightly different in shape and has a different filling. So as a kid, I would love to get these because it's like caramel or it's a malt ball, but there'd be one coffee one in there, and just immediately it's just like recoil.
Like that Harry Potter thing, the one candy that tastes like vomit or whatever.
Yeah, vomit coffee, same thing. But yeah, it's just, and every time
Coffee flavored things don't taste like real coffee taste.
They don't.
It's a bad representation of it.
It is.
It's like, but you know that any like any those little banana candies, you know the ones I'm talking about, like in the runts.
Yeah.
The ones that taste exactly like bananas.
You know what banana tastes like no cherry flavored thing tastes like cherries, never. So
See, it's skeuomorphism.
but it's super interesting that you've never had coffee, but
yeah, I mean, I get your point.
I didn't drink until law school, and I went to law school really late. So I was like 35. I went to law school, and I just drank it purely for like the blast of caffeine, and then over the years I developed a taste.
That's the job to be done, right?
That's the job to be done. But now it's
found
right. That's good. So in law school, the job to be done was like, yes, I'm going to mainline coffee into me so I can make it through, property law or whatever nonsense. Now I'm like, oh, the job to be done is it's like my little morning ritual that I look forward to. And so it's job to be done. Well played. I have to go skateboarding.
Good. Well, this was fun. Let's
Great. We'll do it again.
Yeah, let's download this and see what it
Tomorrow.
sounds like. Every day. Yeah.
Do it
Daily
like an hour.
podcast right off the bat.
All right. Good to see you guys.